The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.
Welcome to the Tim Heale Podcast and Ordinary People's Extraordinary Stories. Today, I'm going to have a chat with Susan. So, Susan, if you can tell me when and where you were born, and if you can describe to me what it was like where you grew up, the schools you went to, and the education that you received.
Sure can. So I was born, my name is Susan Snow. I was born in Southern California, in Glendale, California. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, specifically Canoga Park. That's where my parents bought their first home, my childhood home. And so I went to the schools. But in the late 70s, a lot of us were bussed out to other areas. So I was bussed out to North Hollywood, was about 25 minutes from my hometown.
So did that have an effect? I mean, why did they bus you out of your local area to a different school? Was the school oversubscribed?
No, it was more of a segregation thing. They wanted us to have more experience with other cultures, other areas, things like that. So we were bussed out. I was bussed out for my 5th and 6th grade.
Oh,
And so so I ended up having my continuation into middle school, or junior high is what we called it in Southern California. But the school that I went to, that I had the continuation, it was in North Hollywood.
All right. So,
And it was good because it was near my dad. We'll talk about that a little, but my dad was stationed. His department was right by my school, so if anything happened or if I was sick or whatever, he was close.
So Southern California, then. I mean, there's a song about it. It never rains in Southern California, and I guess because you're so close to the Mexican border, I guess there's a lot of problems that with illegal border crossings, and I guess you get a lot of Hispanics into the school. Is that why they moved you around?
It's not really. I mean, it was all ethnicity. I mean, it was all ethnic. They wanted to expose us to everything, and not. I mean, they just they didn't want us to be an all-white school. Is the bottom line, and so they wanted to open our eyes, and back then there wasn't the divide. So without getting political, so it was just a matter of learning that other kids were different, and that was fine. And we all got along, and I was super close with a lot of people who were of color, and and it was just something that the LA County wanted us to experience.
All right. So Los Angeles, then. I mean, Hollywood. So were you close to the studios where you were going to school?
No, no. The studios were pretty far from where I grew up.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I grew up a pretty normal, a normal childhood. My dad, to get into that. So my dad he was a police officer for LAPD.
All right.
And Yeah. And so growing up with that was a little different because,
Yeah.
kids had, uh, they'd listen to their parents or whatever the case was. And so there was some negativity around the police, the law enforcement community. Um,
Well, I guess
and
programs like was it Hill Street Blues and Chips
yeah,
obviously gave the LAPD an awful boost.
yeah, a little bit. Uh, but it was it was odd. I was the kid that had the cop father, so it was intimidating to some. And so growing up with that, I would get embarrassed sometimes when he became a detective. He would drive his the detective car, the the undercover car. The kids would
Unmarked
call it the
police
narc
car.
car.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he'd, if he'd pick me up from school, or, he would take me to an appointment or something, kids were like, oh my gosh, Susan got arrested and she got, so the rumors would start. And I'm like, no, that was just my dad. Um, so that was a little bit different for me growing up.
So, so what was your high school like then? Was it a big school? Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in hindsight, I mean, looking at it now, it wasn't a huge school, but back when I was going to school, it was huge. Um, the thing about going to high school in California is a lot of the high schools are surrounded in huge fencing. So we felt pretty safe,
hmm.
and there was no talk of school shootings or any of that back then. But I went to high school, and I had like, I mean, for a most part, I it was pretty normal um, experience, and it wasn't until my senior year, um, when my senior year hit, I was excited. I was looking forward to my senior year and all the things. I had met my boyfriend who was in college, and I was excited about having that relationship and being still in high school. So I was the girl with the college boyfriend. Um, but at the same token, my dad, he was a detective at the time, and he was investigating a case at the time. Um, and he testified on Halloween of 1985. And my dad was not, you know, he never worried about testifying. He never, it was just a regular thing. And
Yeah.
he never felt uncomfortable or anything. But this particular morning, my mom had left for work, and she had left, and my dad was trying to get ready for uh, court, and he was very nervous that morning, very nervous, stressed out about his what he was wearing, just weird things that he normally didn't do. And
Hmm.
then so I helped him. He was a little bit colorblind when it came to blues and browns. So I helped him, and was hoping to help him so he could help me, so I could go to a party that night with all my friends. And it was a school night, so there was more
Hmm.
schmoozing that had to happen, especially with him being a cop, right? So um, he went off. I went to school. I argued with him a little bit that morning because he was not having it with the whole party thing on a school night.
Hmm.
And I got frustrated. I went to school, and as soon as school was over, I ran home and I started cleaning everything around the house.
Doing your chores.
I was doing my chores. I was going over, going the extra mile so that I could get the yes. And my mom came home. She was in her costume, and they had a costume contest at her work. And she came home. I was getting in my costume, and the phone rang. And I picked it up because, of course, anytime the phone rings in a teenager's house, it's got to be the
Yeah.
teenager. Well, it wasn't. And it was a lady at my little brother's school. He was 6. Um, and she said that there was a drive-by shooting and that my dad was involved and that um, we needed to come to the school. And I handed the phone to my mom. She talked to her briefly and then got off the phone and said, "We're going to the school." And neither of us knew what we were about to face. So we went and we ended up coming upon police officers walking around, and they were crying. And we saw my dad's truck, and we ran towards the truck. And uh, unfortunately, my dad's body was still there, um, partially covered up. And we saw the aftermath of that. And obviously, that was super traumatic. We were taken into an office. And at 17, I didn't know how to comprehend everything. I saw an ambulance and they weren't doing anything for my dad, and I was confused. Um, and so when we went to the office, my brain almost like split in half. And this is what happens with PTSD. Your one side of your brain sort of comprehends what's happening in front of you, but the other part just doesn't want to acknowledge it. So we we were thrust into this
Hmm.
super chaotic, traumatic experience, and so
Yeah. I
that was
mean,
rough.
for 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 anybody, but for somebody sort of 17 and your brother, I guess he also was around at the time. That's why you had to go to the school to pick him up rather
Yeah,
than
he
get there
yeah, he
for your
witnessed
dad.
it. Yep. Yep, he witnessed it. My dad actually saved his life. He told him to duck down in the truck cuz he knew it was happening. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
So so pretty much your whole family is then traumatized by this.
Yeah.
And was there any support given at the time?
So, initially, when we were taken into the office, there were police officers that kind of took my mom away and left me kind of sitting in the front office area. Um, the ladies in the office didn't know what to say to me, and so they didn't say anything. I could overhear them, and they were talking about what happened, and they said that my dad was killed, and he died, and something clicked in my brain, and I was like, this isn't happening. My
Hmm.
mom came back. I didn't know where my brother was. Like, all I wanted was my mom and my brother, and so it was just such a chaotic situation. And my mom made the choice to send me home, or not home, but with a neighbor, instead of keeping me there. And that was hard.
Yeah.
that
I
was
mean,
that was hard.
did the did the teachers, did the police know that you were directly involved with your dad? Did
Yeah,
they know?
the
I mean,
ladies in
were
the
they
office.
aware of that situation
Yeah, the
when you
ladies in the
arrived?
office knew that I was the daughter. But I think all of all of the attention and, concern and everything obviously was for my 6-year-old brother.
Mm.
Um, and I get that, totally get that. But, when you say the support system, I mean, once I got back to my neighbor's house, my whole entire block was filled with police officers. And my block is usually, where I live was very quiet. It was
Mm.
not, you would never see police on our block hardly ever. And, and then all of a sudden it was just, we were thrust into this situation where we had, because they had not caught the people responsible for my dad's killing, um, we were in danger. So there were police officers, there's like 20 of them, front
Mm.
yard, backyard. We had helicopters over us for days. And there was probably 30 people in my living room that night when I finally got home,
Mm.
that I didn't recognize. The chief of police was standing in my living room. I, you just, you don't go, like you just, it's just an experience, that you just think, how does that even
Yeah.
happen? Um, and in the annals of, you know, history in Southern California, in Los Angeles, there had never been a police officer that was ambushed and
Mm.
killed. Um, and it happened at a school. So there was not school shootings either, like there is
Yeah.
now. And so it was just, I think everybody was so um, freaked out. It was just no, like
Yeah.
nobody knew how to deal with. Everybody was processing what just happened. Um, and so with me, I didn't know that I had PTSD because there wasn't talk about it back then.
Mm.
Nobody understood, mental health situations back then either. Immediately after this happened, at the time, my mom and I's relationship was a little strained, and this just drove a wedge even more.
Mm.
So LAPD decided that they wanted to put us in therapy. And I'd never seen a therapist. I was a teenager. I had no idea.
Yeah.
All I knew is that every day I did not sleep. I walked around in a cloud like I was out of my body. And I only did and processed the things that it was like people pushing me along in my life. Um, but I wasn't present mentally for a very long time. And when I went to the therapist, I didn't know what to expect. Um, but I had all of these fleeting thoughts of leaving this world and taking my
Mm.
life because I wanted to be with my dad so badly. And my friends couldn't help because they couldn't even wrap their heads around what happened. My boyfriend, same thing. Like he was really struggling, and he was only 19 at the time. So when we went to therapy, I thought, okay, well, here's an adult that's going to help me navigate these feelings and work through them and everything. And unfortunately, my sessions were very shallow. And he only asked me about my school and my boyfriend and my relationship with my mother and my brother. And if you can believe it, for an entire year, I saw this man and he never asked me how what happened to my dad affected me. Like
Mm.
he never
I mean,
dove. And
that's really strange
it is
for
strange.
a
Yeah.
therapist
Yeah.
that's there to counsel to I guess he was a bereavement counsellor, was he? or not? But
No,
he was
well, he was a
just a
family counselor and he was hired by LAPD.
mm,
But yeah, I mean, he was a family counselor and he supposedly had a grief kind, he was
mm,
a grief counselor. And, but he never
never asked
asked.
the right questions.
Yeah, and I was a teenager, so like I had no idea how to express my thoughts and what was happening inside of me and all of that. And so for an entire year, I went and saw this man. And after a year, I came into his session and he said, "You know what, Susan, you're a well rounded young lady and you're strong and you're going to be fine for the rest of your life."
Mm,
And I was like, "But wait, I'm a mess. Like, I still have these feelings of wanting to leave this world. And I have plans and I have these things that come in and out and I can't get up in the morning and it's just all the things, the depression just took over. And then I would have anxiety and panic attacks and things like that. And it's just all a part of PTSD that I had no idea. No
mm.
idea. Um, so it wasn't until Columbine happened when we moved here to Colorado that um, I was working as a hairdresser at the time. Um,
Mm.
I just retired after 31 years.
Can
uh,
we go back a little bit before we start
yeah,
looking at how
yeah,
how
yeah,
you finally got to where you are? But if
right.
we can go back that year of counselling you had,
Yeah.
was it all
Uh-huh.
one to one, or was it with your mum and your brother, or was it just yourself?
So it was a couple of times it was with my mom, but mostly it was just me. It was just me
Mm.
and him, and that's it. Yeah.
Did you talk through the incident at all during
No,
that whole period? So you
no,
didn't look at what had actually happened at the
no.
incident.
It's like he wanted to just move me past it. And,
Yeah.
and being a teenager, I had no idea. First of all, I didn't even know what counseling was or, how
Mm.
important it was or any of that. And so I just went because I was told to go. And this was my first experience with it. So
Mm.
I didn't know what he was supposed to ask. You know, I didn't know anything.
So so how soon after the incident did you go to get your first counselling session?
It was not long after. I think probably a month
Mm.
after the funeral is when we started the counseling.
Yeah.
Because there was just still so much going on around it once they found the individuals and all of that. So yeah, we didn't start right away, but it was about a month, I think,
Mm.
afterwards.
So the funeral then, that didn't give any closure at all for you.
No, it was
And
it was very surreal for me.
mm,
It's when you're seeing your father honored like a president, it was unbelievable. I mean, people in our town, and we have a very large, it's Southern California,
yeah.
and people came from all over, and the church was packed. The outside there were police officers for what it felt like miles.
Mm,
Um, they closed off highways. I mean, people were lined up on the street saluting and holding flags up. I mean, it was something that I was proud, obviously, but
mm,
at the same time, it was like, this is
yeah.
just my dad. You know what I mean? It was
Yeah.
just surreal. It was just so real. And no, it added to my trauma actually because
Yeah.
triggers. Yeah,
And you say they caught the perpetrator or the
they did.
perpetrators.
Hmm.
And did they go to trial? What happened to them?
Yeah, yeah, they went to trial 3 years later. And there were two trials actually because there were so many defendants. So the guy who actually killed my dad, the perpetrator that killed my dad, was involved in a robbery ring. He was like the head of a robbery ring,
Mm,
and so there was three main characters, and then there were extra people as well because this was a collaborative effort, and they
mm,
had taken months to plan my dad's murder
yeah,
because the main perpetrator felt like if there was no witnesses, there's no case, kind of thing. So
yeah.
yeah, so that's where that came about, and we went through two trials, um, and that
Did
was rough.
did they get sent down for a long time?
They did. So actually, out of five defendants, three of them were convicted. The main perpetrator was received the death penalty. He's sitting in San Quentin right now, and unfortunately, there's a moratorium on
Mm,
death sentences, so he won't. I'll never see that happen. But he's never getting out either. Um,
yeah, that's a
his right
positive.
hand man, yeah, his right hand man received life imprisonment without parole. And then there was a third defendant who was involved, heavily involved. He spent 32 years in prison and they released him in 2017.
Mm. So, did you get any comfort or any closure at all from those incidents, or from that the trials and the
Um,
perpetrators being sent down for a long time?
the only thing that it gave me was knowing that they were gone, and they weren't
Mm,
going to come after us, or I was no longer in danger. But as far as the trial, that was the one thing that this was a huge story. And so the media was all over it. And they were asking us questions like, how do you feel?
yeah,
And, you know, it's not bringing my dad back. And
no,
that's pretty much how I felt. You can punish these people and, yes, hold them accountable for what they did, but it doesn't reverse what happened.
no.
And so, and I stood up in court, and I faced him, and I read my statement, um, and let him know that he's taken a lot from me at the time, and my mom, my dad missed out a lot of things that he
Mm,
was looking forward to being a part of.
yeah.
My prom day, my graduation from high school, all the things. And, so there was still a lot of anger, you know,
Mm.
um, and I was still dealing with a lot of anger and felt cheated and that kind of thing. But,
So
it,
let's move things on slightly.
mhm.
So that obviously had a big effect on your schooling as well. So did you manage to
Oh, yeah.
graduate? Did you get the prom? Did
By the
any of that happen
skin
for
of
you?
my teeth, Tim. I honestly can't sit here and tell you how I passed my classes. I really, because my senior year is like bits, it's fragmented,
Mm,
and so I don't remember a lot of things. Now, writing my book definitely helped, but there were a lot of things that, I didn't remember. And um, so, yeah, I have no
yeah,
idea how I graduated, but I graduated. And I did go to prom with my then boyfriend, and who's now
yeah.
my husband. Um, and we did go to prom, but even that was like, it was a day that was supposed to be joyous and exciting and
Yeah.
everything, and only half of me felt that way. The
Mm.
other half felt sad and, just I went through a gamut of emotions, where I
I
was
can imagine.
angry and then I was sad and then, I just frustrated and um that kind of thing. And it just
Yeah.
it just it makes you spiral, and you have to figure out how to pull yourself out of that. And so
Yeah.
I would just try to dive into the joy part, but
Yeah.
it was difficult, definitely,
Mm.
you
So
know.
once you'd graduated then and you got through your prom, what did you do next? Did you go to college or what did you do?
I I made a mistake, and even though like my mind wasn't right, I thought the best thing I could do is dive from school to school. So I didn't even give myself time to breathe. And I started, originally, I wanted to be a fashion designer. Um, and I went to the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandise immediately. Um, and I was there for about 8 months. And everything that was going on in my brain really held me back from being the student I needed to be. And there were certain classes I just, for the life of me, was struggling to pass. So I chose at that point to step out of college, the design school, um, and just realize that it just wasn't my calling and I needed to find something else to do. So I spent my early years just working,
Hmm.
you know. Um,
So what was
and
your first job when you dropped out of high school or out of college then?
I actually worked for a tile company as a junior receptionist. And, you know, that was good for me because it was structured. There was very specific things I needed to do. So the brain couldn't go out, go off
Hmm.
and do its own thing. Um, and so I just tried to do the normal stuff, and also, have the unnormal stuff, which was, when I was working for the tile company is when the trial was going on.
Hmm.
And just navigating through that in the emotions around that. Um, it was very frustrating because every day it was on the news over and over and over, and there were days where I just wanted to get away from it,
Yeah.
and I couldn't.
So how did the company treat you at that time? Obviously, for one another, you were kind of a media celebrity, I guess, because you were you were seen on the news, turned up at a trial, and all the rest of it. Did they treat you any different, or did they give you the time to go and to attend court and stuff like that?
I had a great, um, so my manager was pretty great. I mean, he knew what was going on, and so if there were days where I needed to take extra breaks and things like that, it was fine. Our main boss was not great. um, he was kind of sexist and, you know, a derogatory type person.
Hmm.
Um, I did have an incident where it was a big aha moment for me, even as I was 19 at the time, um, almost 20, and there was a day where it was a day that I just wanted to get away from the trial. I was like, I'm going to get in my car and drive to work, and I'm just going to put the radio on and relax on my way to work. And I turned on the radio, and there was a news flash that came on, and it was talking about the trial, and I was so upset. I just wanted some peace in my car. That's it. And when I got to work, I was friends with all the guys in the warehouse and stuff. And so I was going through the warehouse to get to my office. And one of my friends that I work with, he saw the scowl on my face. He saw that I was stressed out. So he thought that it would be funny to chuck up a box at me to get my attention. And when he did that, I turned around and I snapped at him, and I probably called him a few names. And I kept walking and I went to my office. And not even 5 minutes later, my boss rounded the corner. My manager rounded the corner, and he said, "Come with me." And I felt like I was going to the principal's office. Um, and he took me to this empty office, and then my coworker that had done that was standing there next to me, and he said, "You two are going to go into this office and you're going to hash out whatever's going on with you, and you're not leaving until you do." And I was totally confused. I had no idea what the heck was going on. Like, no clue at all. And so me and my coworker, now understand this. The men that took my dad's life were all men of color. Okay. So that was another big thing, the white and the black and all of that stuff. So my friend was a man of color, and we went in and we were talking, and I said, I don't know what this is about. I have no idea what this is about. Like, I'm having a day. I just don't, and he just said to me, "Susan, I'm following the trial." And none of my coworkers would talk about it because they were afraid to. And he said, "I've been following the trial, and I totally understand why, you would hate me." And I said, "I'm sorry, what?" And he said, "Yeah, I totally understand why, you went off on me and you yelled at me and stuff, and I get it because, I'm a black man." And I said, "That has nothing to do. I had a bad morning, and I'm sorry that I took it out on you, you know, and it wasn't right of me, but I'm having a day, and the color of your skin has nothing to do with that. Nothing." And he said, "Well, it would for me if it was the shoe was on the other foot." And I was like, "What?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I mean, if a black man had taken out my dad, I would hate all black men." And I said, "Well, you know what? Here's the thing. Did you plan my dad's murder?" He's like, "No." I said, "Did you shoot him?" He's like, "No." And I said, "Then you have nothing to do with this. Nothing." And it was a big insight to what people perceived, how I should have perceived things. And that's not who my dad raised me to be. He raised me to accept all people and love all people. And so I have lived that in my life. And so when I told him, "You didn't have anything to do with my dad's murder, and it has nothing to do with your skin color, the reason why I got angry with you." Um, I just said, "I'm just sorry that I yelled and screamed at you, and, you didn't deserve that either. So I apologize." And I think he was just a little taken back. He was not expecting that reaction from me. And so we hugged it out, and we moved on with our day. But it was a life lesson for me about perception, and what other people perceive how I should feel about the situation. So,
Yeah, a lot of people. I think it's more common nowadays that people think that people that other people are thinking,
yeah,
or try and um, try and turn the situation around how they
yeah,
think you should be when you're
exactly.
totally not.
Right.
You see it all the time at the moment,
Yeah,
particularly with different protest groups. And I think
right.
I'll leave that one there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
um,
I don't know. It's just, it was just one of those things that again, I'm young, so I just don't know, right?
mm,
I just know how I feel, right? And
yeah,
and the individuals that perpetrated this horrific thing to my dad and my family were sitting in, that were sitting in courtrooms right now
yeah.
and being held accountable. So, but yeah, I mean, it was a big aha moment for me, for sure.
Mm. So should we move things on? Let's have a
Hmm.
look at the reasoning behind where you are now and why you've written your book,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
and how you've come to terms with what's happened.
Yeah. So, as I got older, we married. Now I have two children. We moved to Colorado in '97, and in '99 is when Columbine happened. So I I had been doing okay. I had lived in fight and flight for so long that I didn't know anything different. So I could have a really bad day and put a happy face on, put my mask on, um, and nobody knew, how I was feeling or the feelings I was having or the emotions I was dealing with. And then Columbine happened, and I was at work, and I had set a client under the dryer and went into the back and was turned on our tiny little TV in the break room, and it was all over the news, the coverage. And I started having what I know now was a panic attack. I was sweating. I couldn't catch my breath. I was watching this stuff on the TV, and it was giving me a physical reaction that I did not understand at all. And my coworker rounded the corner and she saw me, and I was pale as a ghost. And she said, "You need to sit down." And the first thing she thought was, "Oh my gosh, do you have a child there? Or do you live in the neighborhood or whatever?" And I said, I don't know what's happening right now. I don't know
Mm,
why I'm reacting like this. And so I left that day. I went and I tried to get myself together for my client, put that mask back on, but I was struggling the whole time. And when I left, it just started this spiral. And for a good week, I I was having the dark thoughts again. I would picture me driving off the road. I mean, I had all of that stuff come flooding back, and I could not understand what was happening. And now I'm a mom, and I have to put the mom mask on and the wife mask on and pretend that I'm doing okay when I'm not. And my husband finally one day met me at the door, and he said, "You have two choices. You either get help or I'm putting you in a hospital. Your choice."
mm.
And I said, "Okay, I'm going to the doctor." So I went to the doctor, and then the doctor sent me to another therapist. And I thought, "Oh no, therapy? What?" So the doctor put me on antidepressants, and which is the first thing they do.
Yeah.
And then I went into the therapist, and this therapist looked me in the face. I had just had maybe a 20-minute conversation with her and gave her a gist of my story and how I was feeling and everything. And she was the first person to look at me in the face and say, "Young lady, everything you've gone through and experienced since you were 17 years old is normal. The panic attacks, the depression, the suicidal ideation, all of that stuff is normal when you have PTSD." And I said, "You mean I'm not crazy?" Because that's what I thought. I thought I
Mm.
was just nuts. Like I had snapped and that was done. Right. And she said, "No." And so she said, "You have PTSD." And I said, "Wait, I didn't go to war. I'm not a military person. I'm not a first responder." Like it wasn't, my practical mind was not wrapping my head around the fact that regular people can have
Yeah.
PTSD. And so that started my journey of learning about myself and how my dad's murder really affected me, and how I fragmented, and how I, because my brain kind of fragmented, and I started compartmentalizing. Um, so it was a big eye opener for me. She started getting me to journal, and I had never heard that term before, of journaling. And so that was the first thing I started doing, is journaling, because she explained to me that getting everything on a paper and out of your brain was the healthy thing to do. And you can kind of work through the emotions that you're feeling at that very moment as you're journaling your words. And that was powerful. Um, I started to read more and do more research on PTSD and learning about triggers. And what I realized is that when Columbine happened, I got triggered badly, because
Mm.
the kids were my age. I saw the ambulances and the fire, and the police department and it just triggered me. Um, and then I did some tapping techniques when my depression was really at its highest. Using affirmations and tapping techniques were really helpful. Um, and as time grew on, we learned more about PTSD and the different modalities that were helpful. I did do EMDR treatments as well, which was amazing.
Mm.
I
I mean,
learned
lots
a
of
lot
people
about
get
the
that.
brain. Yeah.
Yeah, lots of people think that PTSD is only connected to the military and first responders, but
Mhm.
anybody can suffer
Yeah.
from PTSD. It's
Anytime you
it's
have
it's
any kind
it's
of
just
traumatic
witnessing a
experience.
trauma,
Yep.
um, and then
Or,
that'll
yeah,
play on your mind for
yeah,
always.
yeah. I mean, even people who I speak to, people who were abused as kids, who had addiction in the family, who had, I mean, there's so many things that can cause PTSD. And I don't
Mm.
think the general public understands that even us watching traumatic things such as 9/11 and things like that
Yeah.
can can give you PTSD. So it's just, it was all a learning experience. And then when I was going through that, I really had kind of an inkling in my mind that if I'm moving through this myself, and I feel like I should help others, and the more I
Mm.
thought about it, the more I wrapped it around my own kids. Like, I want their moms, I want them to learn from their mom. And so that if anything happens in their life, they're able to move through it.
Mm.
It wasn't until I was 50 years old, though, that I decided that was it. I'm writing this book. I don't know what it is about 50, but I got to 50 and I laid down the gauntlet. That was it. Line in the sand. I was moving forward. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was going to do it. And the one thing that kept me in my mind was, this is my tagline, bulldoze your fear, because I had to bulldoze through all of the traumas and the emotions and everything, even though it was scary. It was scary. Um, I just had to keep moving forward,
Mm.
and not get stuck in it, not live in it anymore. I mean, that was the part of me, is I wanted to break free and be free of my pain and my trauma and my loss. I mean,
Mm.
you're never going to I'm always going to miss my dad,
Yeah.
but that feeling and all the trauma that goes along with it. Um, so that's when I started to write down, and it was a very cathartic thing for me, because it made me dive, and I had repressed memories come up. My fragmented time frames started to kind of come together a little bit more. Um, and it was important, at any time I had any fear around writing it or moving through these emotions, I kept thinking about my purpose. And
Mm.
my purpose was to help others through my words
Mm.
and through my
So
experience.
I've got a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
Um, you said that you had suicidal thoughts quite often.
Hmm.
You saw how to do it, driving off the
Hmm.
road, etc. What prevented you from carrying out self harm?
Oh, I was so conflicted. um, and the thing of it is that I feel like sometimes, there's a fire in you that you just don't know you have. And I
Mm.
think, I always say I'm my father's daughter. Um, I really feel like he's the one that kept me alive. I feel like, that was the fire in my gut. And, I had a boyfriend that loved me, and I loved him, and I still do 38 years later. And, but, I just felt like, and then when I became a mom, I had these two children,
Mm.
and I just felt like I knew what it felt like to have my dad taken from me, and I just couldn't allow that to happen to my children or my husband for that matter. And so there was a fight in me, and there were
Mm.
days that were scary. I mean, really scary. But, you know, uh, when I tell people about depression and how it feels, um, because there's still so much why to it. When people take
Yeah.
their own life, I hear, oh, that was selfish, that was this. And what people don't really realize is that these people are trying to live their lives normally, right? And I
Yeah.
was trying to live my life normally, but your pain is always there and it never goes away. And it's, unless you've worked through it, it lives in you, and it
Yeah.
it comes up in inopportune times. And so it's like walking down the street and falling into a pothole,
Mm.
and it's dark and it's dingy, and you can see the light, you can see the light of the day, but you can't get to it, right? Or you have the fight in you to crawl up and get back into the light, but there's some
Mm.
people that just get tired and they
Yeah.
don't want to fight anymore.
Mm.
And so they let the darkness envelop them, and they're not thinking about, when you're in that state of mind. I mean, it took me a while for me to start thinking about my family and my kids and my husband and all that. But a lot of times people's pain is way too much and they just can't
Yeah.
see anything but getting out.
Mm.
So, and I think the best thing that I did was when I was starting to feel that way is I would journal it out and I would talk to somebody who would listen,
Yeah.
you know. So whether that would be my husband or a friend or a therapist, whatever it was. Um,
Mm.
as long as I talked to somebody and I was heard, because that was a lot of the thing of depression. If you're not heard, you feel
Yeah.
like you're in it by yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So another question is, given all that you've been through, what's your relationship like with your mother and brother? Has the book helped, writing the book helped with the relationship with them, or have you had a fairly strong relationship all the way through with your mum
Mm,
and brother?
no. So my brother and I have been healing our relationship for 5 years. Um, you know, everybody deals with their grief differently and everybody deals with trauma differently. And my mom and my brother chose other ways to deal with their grief um, that were more self sabotaging.
Mm.
And, and that was hard for me. Because everything that happened, with my brother, and so be it. I mean, he was there, and he was 6, but I was kind of pushed aside, and even the media didn't know he had a daughter for 3 days afterwards. Um, and then I I dealt with a lot of just trying to figure things out on my own,
Mm.
even as a teenager, because my mom was off doing her thing and then dealing with my brother, and I was kind of alone on an island. Um,
Yeah.
in writing the book, I realized that there were a lot of things about my relationship with my mother that were um, not healthy. And, um, you know, I have a great relationship with my brother now. And, my relationship with my mother is strained. Um,
Mm.
she she did not like me telling my truth because in my truth is part of her truth.
Yeah.
So, um, but I had to tell the story. I had to tell it, in order for people to understand how I got to the resiliency side of where I am now, and how I no longer walk around with rose colored glasses anymore and I can see things a lot clearer. I know when relationships are unhealthy. Um, I have more self worth, and that's what I want for other people, you know.
Mm.
So, and I wish
That's
that I,
terrific.
I wish my mom could have that, I really
Mm.
do, but she chooses not to. So
Yeah.
that's, I have no control over other people. So, um, yeah.
So where can people find your book?
So my book is available on Amazon. It is in a paperback form, or I do have an e-Kindle form. I'm working on the audio. This is all a process. And I'm also on barnesandnoble.com. And so you can find me on there as well.
Mm.
It's called The Other Side of the Gun: My Journey from Trauma to Resiliency.
Brilliant. Well, Susan, that has been a really fascinating story.
Thank you.
No, you're
Uh, you
welcome.
know, it's my purpose. My purpose is to get out here and help as many people as I can. Um, heal, you know, healing is not
Yeah,
an
I
easy
mean,
thing.
recovering from trauma is a difficult journey for everybody.
Absolutely.
And if
And
somebody
everybody's trauma
can
is
share
different.
their story, that will help somebody else so much the better.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me on.
You're welcome.
The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.